Evening.
Yes, good morning. I think Anjali.
I'm going to mute myself because I've got a noisy dog in here.
Okay, sounds good. Hey.
Hi.
How are you?
Fine. How are you?
Good. You're in New York now?
No, I'm actually at my mom's house in Rhode Island.
Oh, okay.
Foreseeable future. But yes, I'm not in Taiwan anymore.
Yes. So, hey, you know what? So, how long have we known each other? Like
It's 2003-ish. Because Jen, I still have a copy of the original Babysitters Club hardcover, black and white, with a note from you in it.
Oh, okay.
In case, you know, you ever need to prove that you discovered Van Tegelmeyer, I have the evidence. And this way we have the people who remember, right?
Yes. So, okay, but what I was going to say that's really funny is we've known each other since 2003, and I have a feeling that I've been mispronouncing your name since 2003.
Okay, so my name is pronounced, and I don't know how you say it, but we won't revisit it. It's pronounced Anjali. Like, undulate. So the A sound is a U, like under, and then the emphasis is on the first syllable, like in many Indian names.
Anjali.
Kamla, Anjali, Radhika.
Anjali. Okay.
Yeah, but it isn't. It's not where we usually put the emphasis in English, so it's hard.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. But good to get it straight now. Yeah.
So, let's see, who do we have here on the call?
Yeah, so how many people do you usually have for this meetup?
Usually, I don't know, what would you say, Tintin? It's like 40 people, maybe?
Oh my gosh, that's impressive.
Yeah, we'll see.
Do you know each other? Like, do you know everyone who comes?
No, not always. I know a lot of people, but not everybody. Yeah, so Des, is that how you say your name? Tell me how you're saying your name.
Yep, it's Des.
Des, okay, because we just met recently because you joined Kids Comics Unite. And then Tintin is actually in the Philippines, so she just said good morning to me.
Aww. I have to say I'm missing Taiwan. I was there for 4 months this spring because it was hard to work at night. That part was hard, but I would get up in the morning and then I would deal with my inbox and then it would be done. And my day would be my day, and I could read and I could edit and I could think, and and then I would sort of have to start again at like 8 p.m. for 4 hours. But now there's like no period like that in my day. Like there's just like constant like inbox checking and bip. I need to pause my inbox is what I need to do, but
oh yeah, we should talk about email productivity.
Right. Well, you just get to the site. It's like a little rush, right? Oh, let me check my email, and then then I can do this other thing and not do the hard like writing a submission letter thing that I really need to do today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I feel like I need to start getting into the habit of just like closing email on my computer altogether for large chunks of the day.
Yeah, exactly. Or which is sort of the equivalent of pause. And like they've even created a function to help us do that, and yet.
Yes.
It's, I guess, the fear of missing out thing, right? What if a great email comes in?
Have you read Indistractable?
No.
Oh.
I haven't even heard of it. But is it the latest bestseller about?
It probably, yeah. It's a book about digital distraction and like how to handle it. And he has an interesting email system in that book.
Oh, really? Tell me.
So his system is that you, well, first of all, you're probably going to need to declare email bankruptcy, and you just put everything in the archives. You start fresh, and then you have only 2 labels, and your labels are today and this week. So, and every week you have like maybe a 3-hour block of time that is like your email time. So everything that absolutely must be dealt with today, you do that in one chunk of time and you just get it out and get it done. But everything that can wait, that isn't necessarily just today, you just put it straight into this week and then you don't look at it again. So your email inbox basically stays clean. And then during your once a week time, you go in and
do the this week stuff.
That's
and also presumably if you like get all of your today stuff done in your 3-hour window. You can go into your this week window. That's interesting. I mean, I met an organizational expert when I first started at being an agent, and she also was really, really helpful. It wasn't that simplified, but I do try and use my my inbox as my to-do list. So like when times are good, everything has been labeled and archived, labeled and archived, labeled and archived, and it's something if I have to deal with it still, it just stays in my inbox. And then there's like a green file for like just the temporary things, you know, like the upcoming phone call or the upcoming Zoom call or whatever that you kind of get out of your inbox. But like right now, so when times are good, I have like 20 to 30 in that inbox. And then, you know, if I'm like really clearing it out, I maybe get it down to 6 or 7. But now I have like 150 like right now, which doesn't feel good at all.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I always have problems with that. Always. Yeah.
But it's like, I feel like for me, it's just a sign of just having not enough time in the day right now. Partly because we're doing this other business, the lecture business, the Speakers Bureau. And that's just like, yeah, now I have 2 inboxes. That inbox I'm doing great on.
Wow. We should talk about that a little bit. So for those of you who are just joining in, we're just shooting the breeze. We haven't officially started or anything. But we were talking about emails. And then, so how much of your time are you doing on the Speakers Bureau?
Oh, that's such a good question. I had a colleague, Annie Wong, who's also a literary agent, join the agency in February. And we are co-running PLM together. And so March happened, COVID happened, everything paused and like was frozen. And then as things started to thaw and virtual events became more of a reality, we also took on 2 anti-racist educators who are both on the bestseller list. One is Layla Saad and one is Tiffany Jewell. So I feel like the question is really predicated on like what just happened, because it's taken over my life, because we just signed up 2 people who are like very much in demand. And it's happening at a very different pace because corporations are really interested in anti-racist education right now, right here yesterday. And so it's really interesting. Like it's exactly what we needed to kind of, I feel like been building the groundwork for the last 2 years, and we had learned a lot about the business. So I feel like we were poised in a way to have this happen because we know what we're doing finally. But now a lot of my time has been spent, like when we took on Layla, she had 40 requests that had built up since she had like, while we were negotiating and doing contract and whatever. So like we just opened the floodgates. And so now we're like playing catch up, and a lot of the job is vetting, right? Like just vetting these organizations. Who are you, what you're about? Like this better not be a jump on the bandwagon kind of thing. Like this doesn't have to happen this fall, because the conversation around anti-racism and white supremacy is going to be going on for a really long time. And we want to know that there's like top-down structural support. So that's what a lot of my job is. And so it's about, like, I feel like it's useful because it's opening lots of doors that weren't open before, especially in the corporate space. We also represent someone named Sophia Noble, whose book I'm finally reading. It's called Algorithms of Oppression. And it's all about like basically the way the technology is kind of reinforcing like society.
I wonder when did that get published?
2018.
I wonder if I read, no, I think I read something different, but very similar. Also about algorithms.
She's written essays in places, like I feel like she's written for Bitch Magazine, like she's written for other places. So she writes, I feel like in a really, I mean, it's an academic book, but it's pretty accessible. But what she's saying is so important and so scary. And really about, how often we let tech companies off the hook. And they say, it's just a technical glitch, and never acknowledging, because it's also proprietary. And like, these are these corporations that are now controlling how we get information. Corporations who have a value system that's very different from like a library or, a public information source. And they're considered to be neutral and like bringing you the best results. And so, I mean, she's like sort of taking you through like, well, I think in 2010 or 2011, she Googled Black girls, and like, all the first hits were like just incredibly offensive porn sites. And just even like 5 years later, she talked about Googling again. And like, as an academic who uses Google all the time to do certain kinds of searches, it still hadn't sort of recalibrated for like what would be interesting to her, right? Like it's calibrated for what's interesting to the white man who coded it, or the white man who they see as their consumer, right? Like it's not, it's not neutral at all. And it's like, and so, I mean, when we think about AI and the rise of AI, like I feel like those things, and I didn't know this, and then I'm going to stop talking about this because that's not what we're here to talk about, but that they've actually developed software that they were using in the courts to predict whether somebody was likely to commit a crime again. And this software, you know, was like letting white defendants off the hook and much more likely to predict that Black defendants were going to and it's like terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
So it was called North Point software. Anyway, so I love parts of this PLM business because it's getting me into very different spaces. But we are literally talking to corporations that are producing this technology now. And just thinking and hearing how corporations like work and like all of that has been really, really interesting, because even though publishing is technically very corporate, they pretend that they aren't. I had an intern who had a job at Scholastic recently who said, I don't know if she invented this or somebody else told her or you told me this, but Scholastic is a corporation masquerading as a nonprofit.
I didn't tell you that, but that one's good. Actually, I have another former Scholastic person here on the call, Ed Macessa. Yeah. Wow, that's so funny. Yeah, actually, well, I had questions from myself that I wanted to ask you about, like how agenting has changed and the rise of, well, I mean, like you said, publishing has been corporate for a really long time, but it's just getting more and more, and it's like shrinking into these gigantic mega corporations. Yeah.
I know. But I mean, I think my own feeling of having been a woman of color in like corporate publishing was we got a lot, like as I started my career in 1996, as I watched the world around me become more corporate, and then I got older, and then I feel like less friendly to corporations, because, you know, when you're 20 and you're just happy to have a job is very different from when you're 40 and you're senior and you want to be paid well and you want to have children and you want to be supported. And then you become a problem. But thinking about the ways in which I was there was like no corporate structure in place to support me or protect me. Like you just rolled your eyes about HR. You thought those people weren't helpful. They had no power within the corporation. Like, I feel like we got a lot of the corporate BS without any of the like corporate support, you know, like leadership training or management or just anything really. But having said that, Random House, which is like the biggest, hugest conglomerate, and, you know, I'm sure it's problematic in many ways, but still as an employee, the best place I ever worked. And I think because it's a privately held European corporation and we had sabbaticals and, you know, 5 weeks vacation and yoga classes at work. And I definitely, as an employee, felt very well treated. Underpaid, but well treated.
That's the nature of publishing. Yeah, you don't go into publishing to get rich. That's definitely.
Yes, I know, but I feel like there are things that I can articulate now that I'm 48 that I experienced as a young woman in publishing and then as a woman in my 30s in publishing that I didn't have language for. And I feel like part of that was I know the white guys around me are being paid more and are being promoted and lifted up and seen as having value in ways that I'm not. And I know that I have value. I think I have value. I think, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, you know that you do, but then you're not getting any kind of outside support that you do. So then you sort of question that. And I feel like that's just not what happens for white guys in publishing ever. Like, oh my God, you're a straight white guy in publishing. Here's all the money. Here's the title. Let's just lift you up and promote you. I'm making broad generalizations, but I think it's true, right? That like we say, don't expect to get rich if you work in publishing, but there are actually a lot of people, and certainly a lot of people like with big fancy titles making a lot of money. Like, I don't know, like some of the statistics I've seen where it's like shocking that like people are making 300,000 or 600,000 and you're like, oh my God. And I was like so grateful for the crumbs you were throwing me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. Well, what time is it? Oh my gosh, it's all,
No,
it's
we've
official
already started,
time.
guys.
Yeah, we started. We just sort of, okay, so I'm gonna do like a little official tiny intro here. I'm changing to the speaker view. So I'm here with Anjali Singh, and Anjali and I have known each other since 2003. I just found that out today because you remember. But I found out when I was looking up your bio online that you started in publishing in 1996. So you've been in publishing for a super duper duper long time.
I know.
You've seen a lot of changes. And I guess, would you say that you're mainly a literary fiction person, but you have a very interesting background with graphic novels? How would you put it?
That is interesting, because I feel like I would have said that for a long time, and then since I started agenting, I'm much more of a graphic novel person than I'm a literary fiction person. Although I still feel like it's been 5 years. It'll be 5 years next month. I still feel not exactly imposter syndrome, because I definitely feel like I'm hitting my stride, but like I don't have a lot yet to show in the world, even for 5 years of agenting. You know, like I have like 5 or 6 books out, and 1 graphic novel out. Yeah, 1. But, and I didn't look, but I feel like the majority of the deals that I've done are actually for graphic novels. And then the literary fiction is really hard and time consuming, and like such a labor of love. And you're going to get 5 figures if you're lucky. I mean, same for graphic novels, but you can sell those on a computer. So it's not like reading a manuscript 4 or 5 times over.
Oh, shoot, I just muted you. Unmute. How do I unmute?
I had to give you permission to unmute me. I don't know why.
Okay. All right. So that was, I think, what I really wanted to start off with is a story that I always tell everybody about you, and I'm sure everybody here would love to hear the story, which is how you came to be the person who brought Persepolis to the US and published it. So tell that whole story. We'll sort of set the stage with that, and then we can just like dig right into things.
Okay, so the whole story was I started in publishing in 96, and I was a scout, scouting American books for foreign publishers for 5 years. And I was someone who had a long connection with France, and I'd lived in France, and I had traveled in India. And so when I came to work and start a career in publishing, I wanted to do something international, whatever that meant. And people kept pushing me towards subsidiary rights, which is, you know, when you sell the rights to like, you know, Japan. And I was like, I didn't want to be in sales, which I think is very funny, because I am absolutely in sales. That's what I do now. I'm an agent. We are in sales. So I found out about scouting, and I sort of fell into it. And basically, as a scout, you work as a consultant to foreign publishers. So we had like a Japanese client and a German client and a French client. And so it did keep me connected to the world outside of the US. And when I look back on that experience too, I was part of a very small team, and it was very human scaled. And that was, I had friends, right? Every day I went to work with friends, and I got this incredible overview of how American publishing worked. But at the end of the day, even though it was international and I got to go to book fairs, it was all about exporting American culture abroad, right? And then when after I got bored and was looking for another job, I got this job at Vintage Books, which is the paperback arm of the Knopf Group. And I really didn't know much about it. I knew that they had published a lot of vintage internationals, which were all the post-colonial literature books that I had read and loved in college. And I knew it was like a big deal. So I get this job, and the head of the company is Sunny Mehta, who's like the one Indian guy in publishing and very, very revered. And I went to Paris, and I stayed with a really close friend of mine, Marielle, who I had studied Hindi and Urdu with when I lived in Paris after college, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And Marielle had a copy of Persepolis on her bookshelf. And this was spring of 2000, it was February of 2002. So it was like shortly after 9/11. So I think I was watching this rhetoric around, like this anti-Muslim rhetoric that I feel like is like never really been checked, right? Like I feel like it's just full on. And I don't think Marjane would not identify as a Muslim. She doesn't in any way, like she's not religious in any way, but the book really was very much about like what it was to be like living through the Islamic Revolution from a child's eye view. And because it was, well, anyway, you guys know what Persepolis was. It just spoke to me in a really, really immediate way. Like I saw that first page and I saw the humor in it, right? Because on the very first page, there's this picture of her and like, that's me on the left, and she's like half not in the frame. You could just tell. But I also think that there was something about that moment being a post 9/11 moment that made the book speak to me in such an incredible, immediate way. And I knew that it had been successful in France and had gotten reviews. My friend had gone to see her and said, yeah, she speaks English. She's very dynamic. And so I printed out all the reviews. I went to a bookstore. I bought 2 copies of each Persepolis 1 and Persepolis 2, which they were 80 pages each. So in France, there were 2 volumes, but in America, we published them as 1 single volume. And I arrived at my new, and I called the French publisher because the phone number was in the back of the book. And I knew about foreign rights because I'd been a scout. And I asked them if rights were still available. And they said, yes, but, you know, we're pretty far along in doing the book ourselves. So, you know, you should let us know quickly. And I said, well, I'm starting a job at Random House next week. And I read the book on the plane home and walked into my, you know, first day of work and my new job. And I'm like holding this book and I'm so excited. And I mean, I cannot tell you the blank look I got from my boss. I mean, complete, like, what, who are you? You're talking about a French graphic novel about like an Iranian, like, I just did not get it. He's like, yeah, write me a report. And I wrote a report. Like, I didn't know how to be an editor. I didn't know what to do. I felt so out of place at like the Knopf group. And, but I went to Amazon and I looked up who published Jimmy Corrigan, because I know that book is a book that sold really well. It was a comic book, and Mouse, and they were both Pantheon, and that was our sister company. As a new vintage editor, I had to like meet all the other editors I was going to be working with, and Dan Frank, who's still the editor-in-chief of Pantheon, was one of those people. So we had lunch and I pitched him the book, and he reads French, and he was immediately so excited about it. But I think also just so excited to have a young woman who was interested in comics, right, come into his space. Because I realized how unique that was, because now it's been 17 years, he hasn't had it again, really. So he supported me, and I wrote to the French publisher and I said, okay, we're really interested in making an offer, like, tell us. We hear she speaks English. Does she want to do the book, translate the book herself? And they wrote back and they said, you know, thanks, but no thanks. Yeah, no, we're not interested. And
were they thinking about publishing it themselves?
Yeah, they were very far along. It was so they were going to publish it with Fantagraphics. And it was going to be distributed, because they had a relationship with Fantagraphics, because Fantagraphics had published David B's first book, first volume of Epileptic, and the late great Kim Thompson. And they were already at work on a translation, and then the book was already going to be distributed via Norton. It was like in their catalog. I didn't know any of this at the time. And I remember Dan was away at sales conference, and I was just like freaking out. And then I just wrote them like a super impassioned letter, like 5 paragraphs. I made my friend help me translate it into perfect French. I was completely kissing their asses. And I didn't understand either. Like, it's just so funny to me how naive I was, even though I'd been in publishing for 5 years already. L'Association de Publishers is like a Marxist, leftist French comic book collective. Like, I don't even, like, nothing like that exists in America. So I don't even think I understood like what I represented to them. Like, when I met them, they were like, we thought you were gonna look like Hillary Clinton. I was like, you know, I was wearing like, you know, Puma sneakers and like a vintage fur coat, and but they like really, like, in their mind, America, Random House, corporate, I was gonna have like the hair. So anyway, yeah, you're getting the really, really details. So so I wrote the super impassioned letter, and I just said, like, we've published Mouse. This book has been compared to Mouse in the French press. Like, you know, this is a book for everyone. I mean, I wonder if I still have it, because I did actually steal my files when I left Random House. So I have everything related to Persepolis. It's not in their archives. And I used to print things out, because this is back in the day. So anyway, so then they said, you're making us think twice, and, you know, if you're going to make an offer, make it fast and make it good. So we made them a very good 5-figure offer with like a commitment to buy the next 2 volumes, and they said yes. So I mean, it was my passion, absolutely, like my vision and my passion, but it was also like I really was in the right place at the right time. Like, I feel like, God, if I had been Simon & Schuster or any of the horrible corporate American places, sorry, this isn't being recorded, right? But I feel like
it actually is being recorded.
I didn't say horrible. Can you delete that part? But you know, I mean, like so many places where I'm not sure as a young woman I would have been supported, or so many places that like didn't have a culture that was open to graphic novels or open to international stories. I don't know if I would have been heard, right? But I also know that I felt this conviction, like I had been struck by lightning about that project. Like, it had to be in the world. It had to be in the world. Like, I lost sleep before I left Paris and how much I wanted to publish this book. And I've never been an editor before. Like, what did I know? I just knew. Like, I just knew. And then I spent like a year so after we acquired it, I spent a year just being obsessed with it and telling everyone about it until I was blue in the face. And you can imagine I got a lot of blank stares. Like, I wasn't in the game in the way I was supposed to be in the game. Like, I wasn't like, I don't know, it's a game. Publishing is a game. And I was like over here doing my thing. So it was very vindicating when my thing ended up to actually be centered, right? Like when I think about sort of, larger themes too, right? Like I was doing a very peripheral thing, and it was something that a lot of mainstream publishing wasn't going to understand, but it was also going to speak to a really wide swath. Like for me, it was also like anyone who read Sandra Cisneros, who read like The House on Mango Street was going to read this book. But I also think it was like being a non-white person in publishing and like seeing this incredibly immediate story that like, I think it like was a stand-in for all the ways in which my own experience, like being part of an Indian family, was never going to be represented or like recognized, or like all the ways in which what was other and foreign could be made like human and immediate and relatable to mainstream America. And plus she was like super talented. And I think both of my parents are artists, and I was like the writer person, right? I didn't have like those skills, but I think that like graphic novels is this incredible melding for me of like this like appreciation I've always had for aesthetics, but I couldn't express, and then words and the ways that you can, and now thank God, like the science is catching up that, can say that like graphic novels are a very complex way of processing information and communicating stories, and it's not like cheating. So that's the like the gist of it. I sent it around a lot. I did a lot of like reaching out to people in academic communities, Iranian communities, art like Iranian artists, directors. She wrote that book also very specifically to explain her experience to people who weren't Iranian. And I feel like that is one of the reasons that as a book in translation, it worked so well, because I know one of the questions was about books, like translated books coming to America, and specifically books from France. And there was nothing specific, particularly French about that book. But I think, so interestingly, she wasn't particularly interested in like talking to the Iranian community. And now I understand too how complicated that is. But I also think as a strategy and a marketing strategy, it did make a lot of sense, because that was the community that was going to care first and most, right? Here finally is our story being told, or some aspect of our story being told, right, and made visible. And then the thing that sort of pushed it. So it was very modest, like the print run was modest, but the publisher of Pantheon, also her name was Janice Goldklang, she and Marjane are still really close. She got it immediately and was a huge fan. And Sunny Mehta was also someone who I think like appreciated what that story was. But the thing that pushed it over the top, I think, like initially, was I'd sent it to this half Iranian journalist named Tara Bahrampour, who had written a memoir that I knew about from being a scout. And she said, I don't want to blurb this, but I write for the Times. So if she comes to the States, and I made sure she came to the States, I got like a grant from the French consulate. And I want to meet her. And so then she interviewed her, and she put this like amazing profile of Marjane with like pictures of the art on the front page of the New York Times on a Tuesday. That obviously, brought it to national attention. So there's just a lot of things that came together. And when it came out was spring 2003, which was when we invaded Iraq, and we're talking about invading Iran. So she's really incredible and dynamic, and we couldn't have known that going into it, but there were other ways in which like the stars were aligning. And 2.5 million copies later.
Really, 2.5 million now. Wow.
Yeah. And I only know this because I have friends on the inside. It's not like anyone calls me and tells me, by the way, your book has made us a lot of money. Sorry, we didn't pay you more.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have a giant list of questions. But I think what you just described was such an interesting story, and I want to make sure, is there anybody who has any questions just prompted by everything Anjali just said?
It's okay, you guys can ask me questions later.
Yeah.
I'm still feeling bad about being so undiplomatic about these companies that I'm supposed to be selling to.
Oh, Ben had a question. Was all this back and forth with Jean-Christophe Menu?
Yes, it was. Yes. Jean-Christophe Menu, who like came to New York, I heard was on a panel not even that long ago, and he's like, wow, he never looked me up. We had some very, I mean, it was very friendly by the end, but like I remember one particular cover where he was like, we sent him the design, and he was like, it made me want to vomit. It was so French.
Yeah, I was asking because I've always heard he's kind of a pretty prickly character.
Yeah. would say that. But we never met in person. We just had a lot of back and forth. But I mean, I really respect like who they were and how they handled all of it, because they were trusting us. They were like a little collective, and they were trusting this big bad corporate American publisher. Oh, right. So that actually is an important part of the story that I skipped over. So what happened between that first email where I said, you know, we were interested and they said no, was Céline Merien, who was a very important part of the L'Association team at the time and could sort of talk to Jean-Christophe, because it was Jean-Christophe who was like, no. She basically said, you know what, I think we should really think about this, because we know we have something very special. And if we do it ourselves and we fuck it up, or it doesn't do what we think it will, we'll never forgive ourselves. Or if we do it ourselves and it takes off, how are we going to handle that? So I feel like she kind of said the right thing at the right time that kind of opened the gates for it to happen. But I mean, again, it really, like, everything depended on me being able to say we publish Mouse, right? Like, we know what we're doing, and we'll take care of this. And it was very, like, I also am so grateful that I was in a very editorially driven publishing house, which I didn't have anything to compare it to. It's only after my like later experiences that I can look back and go, gosh, it was an incredible experience, because they really hated all our cover designs, and we had to let Marjane design the cover. But of course she should. I mean, it was her book. And it was this back and forth between like, well, that French cover is never going to work in an American bookstore, and we have to appeal to Americans. And she is very, very diplomatic. Like, she is a very, she knows how to get what she wants, but in the most like gracious and Iranian way possible.
Yes. It is a very gracious culture.
Yeah. And I think that's really, and it's a very impressive life skill. And I think to be Marjane in the world, you have to have cultivated that skill.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about now. What's going on now? So I have this question. I think it was from Art. You asked, is a book by a BIPOC creator a harder sell to publishers? And has that changed this year due to
COVID?
Protests?
Oh, protests. Yeah, it's a really good question. In some ways it has changed, in the sense that I think publishers for the very first time are feeling self-conscious and a bit of shame about how white they are. On every level, editorial, marketing, publicity, right? There has been a public shaming. And there have been some really important moves forward, like Dana Kennedy being appointed to be head of SNS, and Lisa Lucas being appointed to be head of publisher of Pantheon, which is a super exciting development, because Pantheon, I feel like, needs new energy and can be such a cool place. And I love everyone there, but like, it hasn't had any new energy in a long. They let me go, and it hasn't had any new energy in a long time. And now that's talking specifically about the adult book space. And the question wasn't specific, because in my experience, the young adult space has been ahead of the curve and ahead of the conversation about representation, and has made more steps. It still has its problems. It is not a perfect place, but they definitely have, more imprints that are devoted to BIPOC voices, that are headed by BIPOC editors, like that have all BIPOC teams. They have that in the kids book space, and they have a conversation around representation that's further ahead. For the longest time, adult publishing, was complete lip service, just complete and total lip service. And I feel like they are recognizing, and we get letters all the time from publishers like, this is what we're doing. And like Dutton just started a new imprint called Tiny Reparations. So in that sense, there is this feeling that things may have shifted. There's always the cynicism and the fear that it's a trend, and that it won't last. And then there's still, for me, a deep-seated frustration that, yes, there are more Black and brown voices being published. There are many Black and brown voices being published, but I still feel like those stories are being vetted by gatekeepers who are white, for the most part. And therefore, it's only certain kinds of stories that get published. And so I definitely have had, I have this author, actually, Gillian Gertz, who's not a person of color. She's Canadian, and she's white. And she wrote a story about two 10-year-old girl detectives. This is my first graphic novel to come out. It came out in mid-July. Yay! And it's kind of like a recasting of Sherlock Holmes in Toronto with two 10-year-old girl detectives. Shirley, who is white, and Jamila, who is Pakistani Canadian. And it was the hardest sell because how dare a white person, right? Like the person who bought it was an Indian, it was Namita Tripathi at Dial Books for Young Readers. Like it took a brown editor to say, I can actually sort through these issues of representation and not be nervous about having a white author tell a story that's not her own, right? Like I feel like that's one of the dangers is that the discussion gets flattened and simplified, and it becomes about who can tell what kinds of stories, which is, I don't think actually what the real issue is. Like if we can talk about American Dirt at some point. I think the issue is about resources and money and gatekeeping and all of those things. But Jillian, Namita vetted Jillian a lot, but Jillian's point was, I'm going to tell a story about Toronto and I'm going to reflect the Toronto that I see. And it would be really weird and wrong for me to write a book that only had white characters in it. And these are all the things I've done to make sure that like I'm representing this character respectfully. And these are the people in my life and in my circle and like my sensitivity readers and all of this. But it was just interesting to me that I was like, this book almost didn't get published because, and Namita's point was, yeah, I would rather, of course, have a Pakistani creator, like be able to bring forward a Pakistani creator's work. But I would also rather this character be in the world than not be in the world, you know? So, but I also just, I just went out with a literary fiction novel that's queer, the author's queer and Black, and the characters are Latinx and Black and queer. And it was interesting because I felt like I had a lot of young editors who loved it. I've never actually had a situation like this where it was like such an emotional roller coaster of like, love, 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 love. Oh, yeah, my team didn't support this. So it's like, I feel like you're bringing in young, more woke people, or you're bringing in young people of color, but then like the higher ups or the team, the larger team, the publicity team, the marketing team, whoever's weighing in is still standing in the way. And like in one situation, it was a very senior editor who'd been brought in to bring in Black voices, and like she didn't get support. And I was like, but you're a grown-up. Like, why are they not letting you do what you want? So I mean, it's not an easy answer, but I don't know. I feel like Aisha actually represents this author named Lady Hubbard, who's a Black writer who I just think is like so genius and talented. And her first book had to be published on a very small press list. And then it won the Hurston Wright Legacy Award and, all this attention. And then Amistad, which is the Black imprint at Harper, hired one more Black editor who's actually a literary fiction editor. The editor who's there is wonderful, is mostly a literary fiction person. And now he's bought two of Aisha's African-American authors, for really nice advances. And I was like, wow, just one person joining the industry can make a difference in like what somebody gets paid and whether or not they get published, or like whether they get published on a big list. And publishing, anyway, I think the statistic was 84% white, or an editorial, it's 2% representation. I mean, it's bad. It's really, 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 really bad. So yeah, yes, I think that they're trying, but it's still like they who are trying also really don't know very much about the experience of being BIPOC or like what they need to do. Like they're early on their racial education journey, I would say. But there are more examples. Yeah, but there are more examples of books by Black and brown writers that have sold. And then of course, every time that happens, then you have better comps and it makes it easier to make the case. But you have to have somebody to make the case. And there is a huge void in that middle level of like senior editors. It's like we've got a lot of junior people and we've got now two bigger senior people, at least on the Adele side, but we don't have anyone in the middle. Very few. Anyway.
Do you want to ask any follow-up question, Arb? If that was your question.
I don't think I have a follow-up right now. It's pretty complex, but I appreciate the answer a lot. And I probably will have a follow-up question later though.
Okay.
I see that somebody, so I just got a question for you. What is your thought about people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, marginalized own voices not wanting to be labeled as such or their work promoted as such? Can someone be brown and still have their stories published without being labeled as such, seeing my white counterpart is just referred to as an author?
Right. Well, I would say America and its relationship to race is very, very, very complicated. And like, I think that that is the ideal. Like, all of us want to just be seen as human, right? I don't want to have to wear my identity on my sleeve, but I feel like we're such a racialized culture. And that, I mean, I think this is speaking a little bit to what I just said, which is that if you don't fit neatly to the box of what a Black and brown writer wants to be or should be, or how they know how to promote you, then no. Then no, they won't. Like, they don't know what to do with you. So I was going to say that I feel like the way we're going, like, I don't feel like we're moving towards the, like, nobody's going to have a racial identity. I feel like we're moving towards the, like, whiteness is being acknowledged as a racial identity as opposed to being, like, invisible or the norm or neutral. So, and to that point, I think it's going to be not that you get to not have to wear your identity on your sleeve, but that everyone else will just have to wear their identity on their sleeve too.
It reminds me of what you said about Marjane Satrapi not being especially interested in promoting to the Iranian American community, and yet that was a really early place where you could build groundswell of support for the book.
Right, but I also think that like a lot of that community is also really conservative, and they're like Shah support, like, you know, like there's all these other layers to that too. And when you're international, is very different. Your relationship to when you're international, like she's Iranian, right? And she kept her Iranian passport so she could say she was Iranian for a very long time. But those of us who have these hyphenated identities, it's much harder because we are American, but we're not seen as American, or we are American, we've had like experiences very different from our white counterparts growing up in America. And but you know, in the Indian American community, please. All these Modi supporters. I'm very anti-Modi. So I don't feel aligned with that community in any way.
Oh, I keep like most of my family at arm's length, and I actually don't have any Indian friends right now. I literally don't. So.
Yeah. You just have to find the Marxists, the communists, the socialists.
Hey, I'm Bengali, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Exactly, it shouldn't. You can't possibly know Bengali Modi supporters, but I anyway, let's not get derailed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Continue.
So actually, you mentioned hyphenated identities, and that reminded me, Des, I think that you asked a question about what if you're interested as a creator in doing perhaps two different types of work that are quite different. Do you have advice as an agent, somebody who's advising people on their careers about how to handle that situation?
That's a very general question, so that's hard. I don't know if I know enough to be able to answer that with any clarity.
Des, do you want to ask anything specific about your situation?
Hi. Yeah, so specifically reason why I asked that question is I write picture books, but also my work in progress is a middle grade magical realism.
Mm-hmm.
So I would really like to develop both genres as part of because I'm originally a storyteller. So I come from a 29-year career of that.
Oh, really?
And I talk to all those ages. So for me personally, it's really important to develop stories for those specific groups.
Yeah.
So that's what I was wondering. I don't know if it helps.
Wildly disparate to me.
Yeah, they're not. They're actually quite.
Yeah. Partly.
Yeah, they're similar, right?
Yeah, partly because the kids book world, like all of that is considered part of the kids book publishing world. Adult publishing and kids book publishing are very, very segregated. But many kids book editors work on picture books and novels and graphic novel. Like many kids book editors kind of divide up what they do because it would be hard to do like any one thing all the time, and most of the lists are representing picture books and some middle grade fiction and whatever. So those, like, I feel like you could be known in the kids book space for both of those things, and that doesn't feel. Yeah, I know that they're very different to write, but that navigating a career doing both of those things doesn't feel like it's anything that's kind of in juxtaposition. Like what's in juxtaposition is I want to write like adult pornography over here and kids books over here, right? Like those things, like it would be hard to have public identities doing both of those things because they they would clash in terms of a simple narrative, in terms of who your audience is, in terms of all of that. publishing likes really simple narratives. And that's partly why this whole like, you know, who's allowed to write what thing.
But I notice a lot of agents say though that they don't, if they do middle grade, they don't want to deal with picture books. That's why I kind of was confused about, you know, kind of which route, because I wouldn't want to go down one lane to have it be problematic later, right?
Well, I would say you have to decide what you want to focus on first, and maybe get yourself, because I think finding the middle grade, like that's a longer haul, like that whole project, writing that book, finding someone to edit it with you, find that person first. And then if you have a good relationship and they sold the book and you have a relationship with an editor, then it's much easier to say, okay, but I want my next project to be a picture book, and then have conversations with people who are already on your team. And I think it would be very unusual for an agent. Like I don't do picture books at all. It's true. Like I feel very out of my depth. And in fact, I have one on submission right now that I think is really good. And Jen, I want your advice. I was actually going to send it to you maybe because I was like, God, this, I don't do these, but this is like so in my lane. It's about whiteness, but like it's done really well. It's like 4 white kids, right? And I was like talking about race, which is so what we need. Anyway, but if I were already in a relationship with you, like if Jillian's next book is going to be a picture book and she already has a relationship with Dial Books for Young Readers, then I don't have to feel like I'm not serving her well. Like we already have a team in place and they know what to do with this. Or you could have an agent who says, yeah, I really don't know what to do, and your editor doesn't want it, but feel free to have a separate editor to be an agent to be a picture book agent. I think that's a more unusual situation, but that's like you can have 2 agents for 2 different aspects of your career if your initial agent doesn't want.
Okay, great. Thank you kindly.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Anything you want to ask? Anybody? I have more. Or Tintin, are you about to ask a question?
Yeah. Well, okay, I had a question earlier. So just to clarify, does that mean that bi POC folks are usually pigeonholed for own voices? Like they're not usually, you can't really write about people that aren't your own ethnicity?
I mean, I feel like that's a really broad generalization. No, I don't think that's true. I think I honestly do think there's room to write what you want to write, but you have to be able to tell a good story about it, and you have to be able to do it really well. Like I'm writing this because this is why this story is what drew me. This is how I did my research for this. And I think that's true for anyone, a white writer, a Black writer, an Asian writer.
Oh, may I follow up?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I was more interested in the publishing context. Like people, like publishers, you were saying they don't know what to do with you if you write outside your ethnicity,
Right.
Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it makes it harder for them because it's not a simple story. So you have to construct a story for them to be able to understand why you're doing it. And because they have to sell it. And in order to sell something, you have to tell a story about why this isn't the simple story. But it's easier to sell it if it is just the simple story. So it's just putting like another layer of making it slightly more difficult, but doesn't mean that there isn't room to do that. And there are many examples of people having done it.
Okay, but you're constructing this whole other like identity and narrative around yourself to sell the book, to sell such a story. I'm sorry.
I mean, again, I would have to like know what the context is to be able to help a little bit more. But like, as I said, with like Jillian, she had to explain why, as a white woman, she wanted to tell a story. And it really does center Jamila. Jamila is the person telling the story. So she had to be able to explain in a very convincing way that she'd been really thoughtful about making that decision. This is partly to protect against, in this case of white writers, it's to protect against bandwagoning, right? Like just jumping on the bandwagon of like, oh, we need representation in stories, so I'm going to throw some characters with color in my book, and then that's going to help me get published because that's what publishers are looking for. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example of a BIPOC writer, but like we represent a writer named Arif Anwar who wrote a book called The Storm. He's Bangladeshi, and it had multiple strands, and one of the strands was the story of a World War II Japanese soldier, and one of the strands was a story of a World War II British white nurse. And then another strand was a Bangladeshi fisherman. So, you know, he's Bangladeshi. He wasn't boxed into only writing about Bangladeshi characters. But he did have a hard time getting published because one publisher was like, we already have a Bangladeshi author on our list. And can you imagine saying that to a white writer, you know? That's the piece where it's like they don't even realize they should be publicly shamed about that they could say that. You know, they could say that as the reason, you know, I really, really like this. I talked to my publisher about it, but we have this other book with a Bangladeshi character in it, not even a Bangladeshi author. So I don't think we should do this one too. And then the person who bought it was a South Asian guy. I'm like, thank God. Thank God he was there, right? Like, oh, one of him.
I have a couple more, another question that came in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think some of the BIPOC books coming out right now are genuinely being sought, or is it just flavor of the moment? And two, what kind of graphic novels are of interest right now?
Gosh, the first question is really hard to answer because I'm really not walking in anyone else's shoes, right? Like I feel very, very, very like much that we're an agency that's been doing this for a long time and representing underrepresented voices for a long time, and try to do it with just with a lot of intentionality and integrity, and like we really only take on books that we truly believe in. But there was a recent Association for Authors Representatives did a really good like meet the Black editors in the adult book space and meet the Black editors in the kids book space. And I remember the adult editors, one of them just saying like, we're getting so much crap, you know, like white agents are like sending out proposals by BIPOC writers that like are full of typos. And like, so like, that's the bandwagoning piece, right? Of like, you're not doing this author a favor, right? And you would you send anyone else's proposal out looking like this? So like when you hear stuff like that, it's disappointing. You're disappointed in your like your community, right? So I think there is I can't say that there isn't an element of that, but I haven't encountered it, and I certainly find that every time I try and sell a writer of color, it's an uphill battle. So, and presumably, like I've been in the business a long time, and I have like some taste, and you know, I'm discerning in what I choose. Okay, and then the second question is, what do people want right now? I don't know. I really don't know. I feel like I'm so not representative of what people want. Everything I do is an uphill battle, and thank God there was that one editor who had a vision for it. I'm never the person who's like, oh, 8 million editors wanted this, and here's $1 million. And that was just to undersell myself. I think it's that I just really enjoy championing the voices that I feel like nobody else is going to do, or that feel a little bit left of center, or feel like they have something really different to contribute to the conversation. So I'd like to say that I'm ahead of the curve, and very few people who are there with me. So yeah, no, I don't feel like and then you do see some of those books and you're like, this isn't very good. Okay. Yeah, I know I can't say anything specific, but yeah, sometimes books come to me and I look at them and I go, really? They're publishing this? This isn't very good, and you wouldn't buy my book? So I know that's not really an answer. Yes, they want representation. There's still so few books that I feel like center Black and Black boys and girls, right? Like in just the graphic novel space. Like, where are those stories? Where are those coming of age stories? And same for pretty much ethnicity X. There could be so much more of that. And I do see a lot of white creators like throwing characters of color in there. And I feel really like, you know, it feels like that is playing to like what the publisher wants to see, but it isn't really contributing to the culture in a meaningful way. So,
well, let's talk about what you are excited about. Like, can you tell us a little bit about, do you have some graphic novel projects right now that you could talk about?
Absolutely. They're all so far away. It's so sad, but I actually managed to sell 3 graphic novels in the adult book space, which I think is a huge triumph because there's like editors in the adult book space who get graphic novels. And so one of them just delivered, and it was the first book I felt like as an agent, I felt about it the way I felt about Persepolis. Like, this is a book that everyone is going to want to read, and it's so important. And it was a Kickstarter campaign, and she's a Black woman historian. And it's a story, a memoir basically, about her research uncovering 2 slave rebellions that happened in New York City in the 18th century. And about the fact that there were women leading these slave rebellions. So it's called Wake, The Hidden History of Women-Led Slave Revolts. And it's both about like why as a Black woman, it was really important to her to uncover these stories, and about the ways in which those stories were just like erased by history or silenced even by, certainly by male historians. Even Black male historians weren't particularly invested in uncovering like Black women's armed resistance. And so, yeah, so I feel like it looks at like New York City slave past, which is something that I think we like to pretend didn't exist. And then it's very much about like in understanding where we came from, and really writing ourselves back into the past and back into the history of this country and all the places and spaces that we've been erased from. It's a way of also imagining ourselves into the future, right? Like if you're erased from the past, your future is also taken from you. So I just think it's really powerful.
And this is a graphic novel?
It's a graphic novel. And
is it a team or is it?
Yeah, so she wrote it, she's the historian, and she worked with an illustrator. And yeah, like both of them, she was a lawyer who then got her PhD and studied with Angela Davis at Santa Cruz, and then like doesn't have a job for racist reasons, because of racism. But so here she is, this incredible, like just one of the smartest, wisest people I've ever met, who has like no public platform, right? Like she's just living her life in, Utah, of all places, and a queer Black woman and her partner, but had written this essay, had done this research that had won like this major award from the American Historical Association, but like it was just languishing there. And then the illustrator was a friend of hers, and he's like literally a cycle rickshaw driver. He's Mexican-American in New Orleans. So like both of these people are people who like really, this is I'm hoping their moment, because they're both just so talented.
So did the author find the illustrator before they found you?
Yeah. They had made their way to each other and then had done this Kickstarter campaign, and then that's when I heard about it and got involved, like via mutual friends. So that's coming out in about a year, and then the other book is by an Egyptian comics artist named Deena Mohammed, who, when she was in college, did this series of webcomics about a hijab-clad superheroine. So this feminist, it's just a very cool character. It was called Kaher, and it went viral, and she was like written about by all these academics. And then she's now like in her mid-20s, and she's such a genius. And it's called Shubek Lubek, which means your wish is my command in Arabic. And it's takes place in an imagined Cairo where wishes are for sale. And there's first class wishes, second class wishes, third class wishes. She's just an amazing storyteller. They're dragons. But it's also very much about, I don't know, she doesn't like it when I get all political, but like I think it's about who's allowed to dream. It's about class very much. And anyway, I won't say any more than that. That's maybe 2 years away, but that's Pantheon. And that's exciting. It's like the old team. It's the same team that published Persepolis. So that's like, and Dan Frank is kind of towards the end of his career. He's probably going to retire at some point, but like, I love that we started with Persepolis together, and like, we'll hopefully get to publish this book together too. And it's the same publicist who's one of my dearest friends, who was a publicist for Persepolis. So, but there's something that feels really great about that. And for her, it was very important to her to be published on the Pantheon list, because she is writing back to people like Craig Thompson, we have a connection to. Janna helped connect me way back in the day, because I bought Habibi. And, but yeah, like writing back to this white male canon. Like she's very much wants to be published on that canon, because her book is in conversation with it.
Right.
And then the other book is a Chinese American mother, daughter, grandmother family story, Persepolis Meets Fun Home. But it's called Feeding Ghosts, and that's also probably at least 2 years away. So such a long haul with graphic novels. And Deena and Tessa who's doing the Chinese American memoir, they're both writing and drawing it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Super cool. Oh wait, I think I might have thoughts on the publishing. Okay, so Arp has a question for you about thoughts on the publishing paid me hashtag on Twitter.
Yeah.
And what, if any, ramifications there are so far on the publishing and gatekeepers sides?
Well, the shaming thing is very helpful. I find it very helpful as an agent because I'm so not afraid to play the race card and be like, are you really going to be cheap with these two, you know, Black creators? Or I actually shouldn't give away all my tricks, but I'm doing it a lot on the PLM side where it's like these corporate spaces where we just kind of go, you know, it's really behooves, you know, corporate America to lean in to anti-racism by paying Black authors what they're really worth and, you know, be anti-racist. Don't just, you know, like, I don't know. It sounds cynical. It's a little cynical, but you know, like I think don't be scared to call them on it. And I think they kind of know that they are accountable in ways that they never felt accountable before. So that is helpful. I think there's just been a lot of naming of things that were kind of silently accepted that were unacceptable. I mean, the Jess Van Ward story is so unbelievably horrifying, right? That like she won the National Book Award and they didn't want to pay her more than $20,000 because, you know, but that is very much, and I feel like the conversation is pretty like sophisticated, right? It's very much these calls and there's no science behind it. It's my internal like gut feeling about who's going to buy and read this book. And if my entire world is on a very privileged world on the Upper West Side, and I only know certain kinds of people, of course I have this limited view. I mean, like it is shocking to me because I never really heard it. But it also is not shocking because you kind of understand it was an internalized part of the culture, right? Like that people have vocalized things like Black people don't read books in public, right? But like, I guess it's better to say it than to think it because then at least you can, but like that has driven decisions about what gets bought and how much you pay for it all this time. And I actually represent Bridget Davis, who wrote a book called The World According to Fannie Davis. She's a Black woman, journalist, novelist, incredible person. And I feel like that was again, I think becoming an agent, the times we live in, agenting that book also was part of like I feel like the beginning of my second racial education, reading Ibram Kendi's Stamp from the Beginning, which everyone in America should read. And I just sold the graphic novel adaptation rights. Aisha and I did in February. But like when I was shaping that book with Bridget, I couldn't even articulate like, we are shaping this for white editors. Like we have to shape this for a white editor to make a call about this. Like it was like when I look back on it, I was like, yeah, that's kind of what I knew, but I didn't have words for that, right? But it was like, we have to do X, Y, and Z to make this kind of rise above just cultural study. And also interesting is that Bridget just had an op-ed in the LA Times a couple weeks ago, where I feel like she's able to talk about the book in more political terms than she was when we were selling it and when the book even was published a year and a half ago, right? Now she can say, I wrote my mom's story as a way to show all of the ways that African Americans were disenfranchised, right? Like I was making this much larger point in writing this very specific story. I mean, we that was teased, like we teased at it, but it wasn't like so explicit. Anyway, so I guess that's evidence to me of the conversation being in a very different place right now, and hoping that it stays there and doesn't like, you know, all of life, one step forward, two steps back, like. But then Trump was the two steps back. So I'm also listening to Michelle Obama's book finally. She's so good. It's so good.
Well, okay, so speaking of changes, since you've been in publishing longer than me and you've seen a lot, what do you have any, well, first of all, what are some major changes that have happened over your career?
Well, like the conglomeratization, right? Like Penguin and Random House most recently, but it's even hard to forget. Well, I worked at Houghton Mifflin briefly between 2006 and 2008. And in the time that I worked there, Houghton Mifflin was owned by a private equity firm, sold to an Irish software developer, merged with Harcourt. And then I think they are like independent again, but like all of that all of that in ways that again, I'm in publishing. I don't think about money. I don't think about like corporates. And now I'm like, God, what an idiot. I went to work for a company owned by a private equity firm. How did I not understand? I was told that they were just going to buy themselves back, but like private equity firms strip the companies that they work for. Like they're not in the business, like I didn't know those things. And then people they sold them to were bad people who were only interested in the learning educational side of the company. But I feel like Houghton Mifflin and Harcourt were two mid-sized companies that were mostly educational publishers, and then they had like 10% of each company was like a very literary list. And Houghton published Fun Home. Houghton published Best American Comics when I was there. So Houghton, they were both like very unique places for literary fiction and for being able to kind of, I think, take risks. I mean, they were still very white spaces, but they still were kind of unique in publishing. And now there's Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, which I feel like they have Versify, which is a very cool kids book imprint with Kwame Alexander, and everything about that, I think, like even just the collaborative way it's run, like that just seems like a really good thing. And there are obviously many good people at Houghton, but I don't feel that it has like a distinct identity in the way that it did. I feel like when I feel like I hit the end of the road with my literary or fiction career or career as an editor, it was kind of like, right, I feel like the Houghton and the Harcourts of this world would have been a good fit for me, but they don't exist anymore. They're just like another big five company trying to do the commercial literary sweet spot, blah, 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 blah. And that, that like when you go through mergers, and like the person who hired me, who's an amazing, she was an amazing publisher, and now she's an agent. Like, she was fired after 28 years. Like you lose the culture, right? And you lose the history of the place. And I mean, I know that they were like, like they go in, they look in your, like, which paintings can we sell, right? Like, it's like that crass, right? Like that's what happens. What are the assets of this company? I just saw the movie Greed. I saw it on the plane coming back from Taiwan, but it's a satire about basically all of this stuff. Like this guy Steve Coogan, who's like worth like billions of dollars, and he's trying to plan a 60th birthday party on a Greek island. And you understand like how he made his money. And I'm like, yeah, this is actually how people are accumulating wealth. Anyway, sorry, that was not the question. What are the changes in publishing? I feel like Sunny Mehta dying, that was a big one. That's a big loss. That's all really recent. But mostly, I think it's...
well, maybe let's talk a little bit about agenting. Like being an agent now, since you started out and you had a very long career as an editor. Like how do you see your role, and how do you see the place of agents changing due to this conglomeratization that's happening?
Well, I mean, I can say as an agent, I feel like I can be my whole self in ways that I couldn't as a corporate employee. I feel, I mean, I can only speak to sort of one way of being an agent, right? Which is the way that we are, meaning like we're a small boutique agency in Harlem, where I'm allowed and encouraged to be mission driven in the choices that I make about what I do. So I feel like that's also a very different way of being an agent. You can be an agent at a William Morris, and I feel like that, how different is that from being a corporate employee at Random House? So for me, the being an agent means that I can be mission driven in what I do in ways that I couldn't.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
Only a little bit. It looks like you're frozen.
Yeah, well, video.
Maybe you should jump off and rejoin.
Is that better?
Yeah, it is better.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
Your image is still frozen. Oh, bummer. Can you hear? All right, I think she's gonna jump back on. Does anybody have any questions you want to ask? Tintin has another one. Oh, you put it in the chat? Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll ask that question. Okay, and then Ben, I see you got a question. Hopefully she'll get back. How's everybody doing?
Hey, can you hear me? Can you see?
Oh, no, I can't. Yes, but wait a minute. Where are you?
You can't see me.
Yeah, okay, there you are. Yay! Actually, okay, so keep talking with what you're saying, and then we have 2 other questions in the chat.
Okay. So I think I was just saying that, I mean, just to quickly answer like what the conglomeratization means, in very real terms for authors, I feel like it means that everything's about cost cutting and they kind of do their best by you, but all the resources go to the $1 million books. And so as like one of our added values is the human scaledness and a lot of the hand-holding and full serviceness that we do as a small agency. So I feel like I'm often stepping in to fill in the gaps or help the author fill in the gaps that the publisher can't do. Like, they're not going to do any local media. If you're from Philadelphia, they're still not going to do any local media. If your book is about Detroit, they're still not going to do any local media, right? So who's going to do that or help you know that you need to do it? So I think that's what I would say, that I feel like I'm everything. I'm like speaker agent, publicist, editor, because I'm editing a lot before you sell the book. But I also really love it. Aisha always says this is the hardest job I've ever had, but the most rewarding, and I think that's true. Although you keep waiting to be like, oh, I can relax now. You know, oh, the book just came out, or I just sold the book, and it's never like that. It's always like, okay, on to the next. Okay.
Okay, so another question from Tintin. She says, you have a lot of international clients. How hard is it to sell a book by a person based outside the US?
Just as hard as it is for all my other authors. Just hard. Just always hard. You know, I haven't had those books come out yet, so it's going to be interesting to see what the publishing hurdles are in terms of like publicizing when you have an author who's not here. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I only take on projects by international authors that I feel like I have a chance of being able to sell here. So I have a South African author, but one strand of the story was about Langston Hughes, or Deena's book. But yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with America, but it is like a young feminist Muslim voice, which I think is something that people like understand needs representation and are hungry to see. Well, I have my Salman Tour, who's a Pakistani painter, queer painter, but he is kind of half in New York and half outside. But the story, the entirety of the story was set in Lahore, and I sold it to Arthur Levine.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, well, I heard that Arthur liked international stories, and it was like queer and international, so it was like a slam dunk.
So is it a YA?
Yeah, it's a YA.
Oh, cool.
But I mean, interestingly, like when he came to me, it wasn't. I mean, it was kind of this sort of overview, like sort of loosey-goosey, beautiful. I mean, he was an incredible artist. And so I do feel a sense of like, not vindication exactly, but I was like, oh, okay, I do know what I'm doing. Because I was like, look, if you want to sell the story, I think we're going to have to sell it in the YA space. I did submit it to adult and kids book publishers, but we had shaped it so much for the YA space by the time it went out that I felt like it was a very YA coming of age story. But when Arthur bought it, I did feel like, yes, like I figured out the way to get this story or this artist into the US marketplace, because that's my job, right? I'm the arbiter, or the person who supposedly understands the marketplace. And so we worked for a long time and did like a full script. Even, I mean, he's so talented. And then we even went back and forth a little bit with Arthur on the art style too, because Arthur had a very, like, he was like, yeah, I don't like the sample as much as I like his painting style. Can he bring his painting style? And I feel like for a lot of my projects, that is what you need. Like, you need the person who has the vision and isn't scared to have the vision and isn't scared to enter into the conversation with the artist. And I think that's what's hard to find. And maybe particularly because what I represent does, I feel like, resonate with like POC editors, but they're not the ones with the power or the confidence or the, you know, to push things through. I guess what I'm trying to say is like they're tastemakers. People who've been anointed with that power in the industry are very few and far between. And for a lot of my very out of the box projects, I kind of rely on those people, you know?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
People who are able to really take a risk.
So Ben had a really good question. He said, did you say that you bought Habibi? I'm curious what your thoughts are on the criticism of that book on the grounds of Orientalism, cultural appropriation, etc.
Yeah.
Did that backlash take you off guard, or was it something that you considered in the process? And do you think it's warranted?
Such a good question. So,
I'm sorry, I'm not very good at softball questions.
no. It's really good. And I haven't really unpacked my feelings about Habibi. I acquired it. I acquired it on a few pages. I had read Blankets and loved it. And Craig is such a lovely human being and so talented. I probably, being the person that I am now, wouldn't buy that book now, right? But I was a young editor. He's like a really like successful comic book artist. I think anytime you see other cultures being represented, there's a draw to it. But I left, like literally I bought the book and then I went to Houghton Mifflin. So I wasn't really like, I wasn't part of shaping the book, but I'm not sure that I would have known how then either, right? Like simply being brown didn't give me necessarily, and I had a super political education. I went to Brown and I studied post-colonial lit, and I actually thought a lot about things like appropriation. But then I went into white publishing, and I feel like those two pieces of myself couldn't coexist, right? So I didn't really engage with any of the criticism, and I didn't really have to. And it's kind of more now in the space that I am, and also in the conversations I've had with Deena. And I represent another Egyptian author named Shireen Hamdi, who's also writing a graphic novel, a YA graphic novel about a Muslim American girl's coming of age. And she's written essays critical about Habibi too. So I would say that it probably is justified, but that story feels so distant to me. And I think Craig's was obviously really well-meaning, and he was also writing it into a very different political moment than we're in right now. Yeah.
Got you. Thank you.
Yeah. So Yanwari has a question. What advice would you give to emerging authors and illustrators who are new to the publishing industry?
And want to be published. I mean, I guess just work, right? Like work and figure out the stories that you want to tell that are meaningful. I guess that's what I would say. Like, I think one of the tricks to getting published is saying, like, having something to contribute to a conversation that's ongoing, like you're in conversation with other books, or you're saying something that hasn't been said before. And it might take you a while to get the skill set to tell the story that you want to tell, or a while to figure out what that story is. Like, what is the story that you feel you were born to tell that has drawn you or driven you to be an artist? And then do all those things, like network and go to Comic-Cons and make your mini comics and sell them, and just get better, right? I feel like just get better. And I think always in any kind of publishing, it's really helpful to be part of a community. So find your people, and the people even within the comics industry that are truly your people. Because as you know, I think is the other issue with comics, it is a, what is it? John Jennings says this. It's a genre, not a
category, not a genre.
It's a category, not a genre, right? Because I remember when I published Persepolis, people were like, "Oh, do you read comics?" And I was like, "No." I never, no. And then I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess I did as a kid. I didn't count them, like Richie Rich and Archie and Tintin and Mad Magazine, but like I didn't count that as part of like my formative years." But then my formation. But then I think like Persepolis, it was a comic. It was a very different kind of story than a lot of comics were telling. And it's not really fair to kind of lump them all together.
Well, I think that was a beautiful answer.
Thanks.
Does anybody have a last question? I'm really glad that we are sort of wrapping up on that, because I love how you answered that question. Any other last questions?
After you already said that was the best last question, nobody can ask another question.
I guess that's true. That's true. We ended on a really perfect note. So I promised you that Anjali would be really cool, right? I said this was going to be a good conversation.
Anjali can talk.
Yeah.
We know that.
Cool.
Well, thank you
right.
for having me. It was so
Yeah.
fun, and it's just been so fun in this new phase in our career and our separate careers to kind of reconnect and find our ways back to each other after being in very, very different spaces, each of us for a long time. And here we are, kind of back where we started, right? Like championing comics.
Yep. Very, very true.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, have a good night or a good day if you're halfway across the world.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks,
Everyone. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.